Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, they're all. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to this side event on enforcing the sanction against Russia. As you see, I'm not Siv Mossleth, but my name is Bård Hoksrud, and I'm acting head of the Norwegian delegation to this meeting. I'm grateful to the delegation of the US and Ukraine for co-hosting this event. Happy to have my colleagues to represent Jo Wilson and Mr. Mikita Kotariev here, and many thanks to the Norwegian Helsinki Committee for initiating this event based on a report on sanctions evasion. They have also helped us to get a very strong panel for today's event, consisting of Deputy Secretary General Gunnar Ekelöve Slydal, Mr. Erland Bjortvedt of Kursk, and Mr. Bill Browder, the head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Today is almost 2 years since Russia's unacceptable war of aggression against Ukraine started. Many of us were gathered here in Vienna at that time. We all stand together with you in our support of Ukraine for as long as it takes. The support of Ukraine is strong. My country has a long-term program, the Nansen program. All the political parties in our parliament stand behind it. In recent months, there has been political debate both in Europe and in the US on the level of support of Ukraine, for Ukraine. As MPs, we need to look broadly at all the ways in which we can affect the Russian war machinery, because Ukraine must win this war. The EU sanctions regime is a powerful tool, and my country is also part of those sanctions. It is critical that the sanctions are effective. They are the best way to stop the flow of income that the Russian state needs to finance the war. Research has shown that the sanctions regime has an impact on the Russian economy and is hampering its war efforts. But at the same time, the report suggests that Russia can still import many war-critical goods. We must look for ways to put an end to this practice. The report will be presented in detail here today by Kursk and the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. I look forward to hearing more about it. As MPs, as lawmakers, we can make a difference in our countries. We can ask questions about how the export control regimes works and how much information our business have on where products end up. One of the findings suggests that the Belarus sanctions will be stepped up to prevent the country from being a channel for certain goods to Russia. For me, as a member of our parliamentary supporter group for Democratic Belarus, I hope we can learn more about that today also. I would like to invite you to an open debate where we can all learn from each other. And I will now like to give the floor to Representative Wilson. I look forward to hearing what you all have to say today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen and friends of democracy, it's so appropriate to be here with Norway. It was Norway that helped inspire their neighbors with Finland and Sweden to join NATO. How incredible. And you're a positive example of what NATO is. It's a defensive organization for peace and security, not offensive in any way. And so I want to give Norway so much credit. And my visits to Norway, I just have treasured. But again, to bring your next door neighbor, Sweden, with its industrial capabilities, to bring the brave people of Finland who were so courageous in the Winter War of 1939, and then to bring along 830-mile border to extend the border with Norway already with the Russian Federation another 830 miles as a message to Mr. Putin that there are people next door. And then a final point on that, the defense for the people of the Baltic republics. How incredible to have their neighbors that are so important, and so for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, that America is so grateful. Beginning in 1940, we never recognized the Soviet occupation, that they were always independent countries, and now their security, from my perspective, has never been greater. And I want to thank you for joining today. The topic of export controls on Russia is of huge importance. In fact, with the February 16th assassination of Alexei Navalny, it's never been more important that the world respond to the assassination. And I'm very grateful a newspaper that's not very friendly to me is the New York Times. And front page of the New York Times today is a front page article, actually op-ed, calling for the strongest response possible, and it's bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats want our president to act responsibly and quickly and firmly and effectively. And so it is bipartisan that we're calling and working not against but with the president to come up with the best to certainly respond to the assassination of Navalny. Successful export controls could have blocked the Russian resupply and ensured its military could not continue its murder in Ukraine. Sadly, this hadn't happened. Our export controls have been full of holes, enabling Russia and Putin to get ahead of the technology and parts it needs to continue waging its war. We now need to look carefully at where we went wrong, and plug the gaps that allowed avoidance and evasion of export controls. And personally, I really want to look ahead, not back, because we've just got to act together in a bipartisan manner. I am very grateful to have with us today Erlen Bajorovit, a key sanctions expert of the Co-Risk Consultancy, and he is known as someone who understands the ins and outs of how we can plug the holes of the sanctions and export controls. And I've already expressed to him my appreciation of what he'll be doing beginning immediately to help our country respond. And then we get to hear from a longtime friend, Bill Browder. Bill Browder is a friend of the Commission and works night and day to hold Putin to account. He's actually made such a difference in America and around the world. His attorney, Sergei Magnitsky, was killed by the Russian state after exposing an enormous $230 million fraud committed by the Putin regime. His campaign for justice for Sergei is an inspiration for all and has actually led to the Magnitsky Act, which has been used successfully to fight corruption around the world. And finally, we'll hear from Gunnar Eklöf Slidell, the Deputy Secretary General of the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. He is deeply focused on ensuring Norway and Europe do everything they can to help Ukraine win and defend itself against Russia's brutal war and unprovoked aggression. I look forward to your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Representatives Hoxrud, Wilson, and Putrayev. My name is Alan Björtvedt. I am a founder of a country risk analytics firm. And to make it very short, immediately after Russia's attack on Ukraine in February 2 years ago, we started drilling into trade, sanction evasions, trade data, and customs data. And over the last year, we've been so lucky to supply analysis, data, information to government of Germany, government of the United States, government of Finland, Poland, and several others. What we will do today is to say a little bit about how sanctions are progressing. This will be basically the same presentation we did for the G7 Plus meeting in Poland in January, together with Kyiv School of Economics colleagues there. To put it very briefly, we will focus on sanctions of commodities. There are financial sanctions, sanctions of individuals, and the human rights instrument element in sanctions is mainly focusing, and Mr. Browder will probably elaborate on that, focusing on sanctioning individuals. But what we will focus on here today, in accordance with our research, is how have sanctions of commodity progressed, and to which degree have the sanctioning alliance succeeded in preventing Russia from getting supplies of war critical goods and technologies. So put it very briefly, the sanctions of commodities have worked partly, but not very well. To put it just kind of as in a headline summary. You have probably seen in the media reports of how goods are getting through the borders, supplies are ending up in Russia. You will even probably have seen media reports of how well the Russian economy is doing. I will modify this picture quite a bit, try to be brief. But in general terms, so what happened in 2022, the US enacted quite harsh sanctions, on commodity sanctions. The EU followed suit quite reluctantly, and it's only from about April, July 2023, so only about last half year, that Europe has sanctioned really kind of large kind of breadth of the critical goods. So what happened immediately after Russia's illegal attack on the Ukraine? Western exports to Ukraine plummeted. They were more than halved. So we went from 8 billion euros per month to less than 4 billion euros per month. So they were more than cut in half. But then started to climb again, and what happened is that Western companies started quite rapidly from May 22 and all up until December 22. Western companies started to export sanctioned goods to Russia via third countries. So what does this mean? So basically, we have issued a report which you can assess via the Helsinki Committee, laying out the details. But what this means is that goods produced in Europe and the US are ending up in Russia, but formerly being exported and even so-called parallel exported by companies registered in countries like Kazakhstan, Turkey, Belarus, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, etc., etc., etc. Basically, third countries. However, the goods so this has to do with compliance, companies' compliance. However, the goods that goes from central kind of EU territory, it ends up in Russia, is being exported via a middleman trader registered in Kazakhstan. As a very typical example, the goods are never in Kazakhstan. They are never there. So what happened? The goods go more or less directly from EU territory into Russia. It could be absolutely directly, and this happens massively. I repeat, massively. The sanctioned goods can go by lorry, by truck, directly from EU territory to Russia. This is very widespread. We have revealed this together with Deutsche Welle and German TV station Arte. That was released 2 days ago. We have worked with Finnish TV station Yle, German newspapers Der Spiegel, Frankfurt Allgemeine, and we have revealed so many cases. And we can also show this without of customs data. We can show this also in the macro, actually how big that circumvention or that kind of evasion of sanctions is. So basically, Western countries, since Russia's attack, have sold goods to Russia via third countries worth 30 billion euros, or $31 billion. And this has been mainly via intermediaries in some specific third countries. However, the goods move from the EU eastwards to Russia, and to a very high degree either via, needless to say, you can look at the map, via Finland and the Baltic states, to say it very blunt, because they have to kind of go somewhere. They have to do mostly rolling by road. But we estimate that the big chunk of sanctioned goods that goes by road to Russia goes actually via Belarus. And this is a very peculiar challenge and situation because the sanctions of exports of war critical and other goods to Russia are not the same as the sanction of commodities exporting to Belarus. So there are 3,500 goods that you cannot sell to Russia, but 3,000 of them you can legally sell to Belarus. So this means that about kind of 4 out of 5, something like that, goods that you cannot sell to Russia, you can legally sell it to Belarus. And that doesn't really need very much more explanation when it comes to why goods, trucks and lorries roll via Belarus to central areas of Russia, because you have this, what we call the Belarus gap. And this is a question of legislation, of regulation. So this is a first kind of recommendation, which is both from the expert side and from the Helsinki Committee. We had closed this Belarus gap. We see that there are several governments taking initiatives, and I think this is important. So of the $30 billion or 30 billion euro sanctioned goods that have ended up in Russia via third countries, we estimate that maybe as much as 1/3 of that, $10 billion or euros of sanctioned goods, Western goods, entered Russia via Belarus. Those were the bad news. And just to make sure, I think there is hardly any representative here who represents a country which is not part of the evasion scheme, because everyone are. And there are even companies whose sanctioned goods end up in Russia, even from small countries like Malta, Cyprus, Iceland, etc. So we are all kind of into an obligation, a liability to find solutions and to plug the holes, so to say, in the sanctions. We looked at what's so-called high priority. There's a high priority list of 51 goods that Russia should absolutely not have. Digital components, the most for critical goods. There's a common list of the US, EU, and Britain. And we looked at those goods, and the same did also Kyiv School of Economics. We came to exactly the same results. So every month, Russia, up till December 22, Russia managed to import as much as $2.5 billion of those goods every month. So to the good news, because something has happened after December 22, which some media are starting to report, the BBC and a few others, Politico and others. But actually, when you look at the data, you will see that from January last year, so over the last 13 months, Russian imports, first of all, Russia's imports have fallen. They have fallen constantly since mid-22. And we have institutes like the Bruegel in Brussels who are monitoring this. But Russia's imports of all kinds of sanctioned goods and especially war-critical goods are massively declining. So Russia's import of the high-priority goods over the last year has dropped by 63%. And even more than that, because that's the import in value. But today, Russians pay 2 times more for the same technology as they bought like 2 years ago, according to the latest report from Kyiv School of Economics. So why is it that Russia suddenly imports much less of all the things they need for the war? It's not because of the success of the commodity sanctions, because we can see that goods that are still getting through, they're getting from China and elsewhere. Oh, it's basically, and the only explanation we can find is they don't have the money for many reasons. First, Russia's exports is declining every month. That's been a steady long-term development. But other thing is that when Russia exports, that they are relatively receiving less dollars and euros for that exports and more yuans and rubles. So this is a new dimension to it. What we did was we studied all of Russia's exports in 2021 and 2023, and we studied like 30,000 trades, and we saw what kind of currency did Russia get for their exports. So what we saw actually was that in 2021 they got a lot of dollars and euros, whereas in the fourth quarter, same quarter 2023, the latest quarter just before Christmas, latest Christmas, so from October to December, they also got quite a lot of dollars and euros, but they got more and more rubles and yuans. And that means that their stock of foreign exchange of hard currency is being depleted. So what we also saw that when Russia imports war tech, for example, high priority goods, they have to pay quite a lot of them in dollars or euros. The sad thing about this, and the challenge to many around this table, is that who is it that pays Russia in hard currency? Who is it that pays Russia in dollars or euros? That is clearly the Western countries themselves. So what we do actually, that we supply Russia with dollars and euros. We pay that for the petrol and diesel, for the raw oil to the degree that we import that. That's only Bulgaria left to import. But for the fertilizer and for the wheat and partly also quite a big degree for the sunflower oil and many other items. So more than countries in the global south, European and US importers pay for Russian goods in dollars and euros, whereas from the global south, Russia receives much more yuans and rubles and other things. And this has to do about Russia being pushed into a parallel currency universe. But the political issue about this is also, why do we as Western countries keep supplying the Russian businesses and the central bank with hard currency that they need for purchasing high tech and war tech that is partly also produced in the West. We don't have much time. We could kind of go into details until tomorrow if necessary, but very briefly, the issues or the most fundamental challenges at hand. So the financial sanctions are working quite a lot, and this has so the decline in Russia's ability to buy, the decline in Russia's ability to pay, the decline in Russia's exports, all of this has to do with the combination of the energy export and the financial export. And the financial export, we can see this in data, they are kicking in very hard. And this effect spills over so that Russia is less able to buy the commodities, but it's probably not the commodity sanctions in themselves that are working. But the financial sanctions are spilling over and making the commodity, the aims in the commodity sphere to work, so to say. What is needed? I mean, challenges when we from the research, we see some things that are quite paramount. We see there's poor border control. We know that there is poor border control, especially towards Belarus. We have the Belarus gap, which needs to be plugged. So basically, we need to have the same sanctions of Russia and Belarus. And we should really see more use of secondary sanctions from the EU, such as the US and Britain are applying. There is very important work going on in the EU to try to harmonize sanction laws. When it comes to sanction laws, this is a field of study in itself. We have started studying that. There seems to be some countries that have some challenges with their legislative frameworks and maybe need to strengthen and renew those. But first of all, we would also like to see some prosecutions. There have been very, very few prosecutions over sanction laws. Sorry. For example, in Great Britain, a company hasn't been prosecuted since 2011 on sanction laws. Denmark has sentenced a few companies, but all over, in this latest round after Russia's legal attack, there have been hardly any. So that, I think, sums up. Please direct questions. There is a handout, which is unfortunately not in colors and not for all, but please contact us after discussions as well, and we can elaborate in detail if necessary. Thank you very much.
And thank you, thank you very much, Mr. Helyar. And now we proceed to Bill Browder.
Congressman Wilson, thank you for chairing this, and thank you for all the support that you've given the Magnitsky Act, Vladimir Karamurza, and all the things that most of us here care about. You've been a good friend. And Gunnar from the Norwegian Helsinki Committee has been with me in the fight for justice for Sergei Magnitsky since the very day it started, when it wasn't considered nobody knew who I was. He stepped to my side and has been with me ever since. And Gunnar, thank you for that. Those of you who don't know me, I guess the reason you would know me is that I'm behind the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act is a piece of legislation that was named after Sergei Magnitsky, who was my Russian lawyer, who had covered a $230 million corruption scheme, exposed it. Within, I should say, the corruption scheme, one of the beneficiaries was Vladimir Putin. He exposed it and was subsequently arrested, tortured for 358 days, and killed on November 16th, 2009. And after his death, I decided to try to find justice for Sergei. And one of the first places I actually came to find justice was in 2000. He was killed in 2009, and I came here to Vienna, to the OSCE, to this exact meeting, at this exact time of year, so it was February. I didn't know anybody, and I tried to host a side event on sanctions, and 4 people showed up. And so the fact that this room is entirely full tells you a lot about the world, a lot about sanctions, a lot about Putin, and everything. It's remarkable that we have a full room of people that basically all the great and good here care. And so I'm really, I mean, it's sad. I guess it's good and it's sad. It's sad that everybody's here because of the problems that have been created, and it's good that everyone cares about sanctions. So my original idea when I was telling everybody about sanctions was individual sanctions. Go after the individuals who commit the atrocities, who are the kleptocrats, and that will be a very strong deterrent for people to do further atrocities and kleptocracy. And I think that it does work to a certain, it has worked and it does work to a certain extent, but it certainly wasn't applied uniformly and robustly against Putin and his regime in subsequent years after the Magnitsky Act was passed in the United States and various other countries. There was a whole culture of appeasement. We needed to do business with Russia. We need to buy their gas. The British wanted to have their oligarchs buy real estate. People didn't want to rock the boat. And as a result, Putin committed other atrocities. He annexed Crimea, invaded eastern Ukraine, carpet bombed Syria, organized assassination squads in Salisbury and against Litvinenko, cheated in the Olympics. And every time he did something terrible, nobody really wanted to react because everyone wanted to do business, be friends, etc. And I think that the lack of action gave Putin a false sense of security, which is that if he were to do something really radical, like invade Ukraine, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, that there would be no consequences, or no real consequences. And so he did the unthinkable, which is he invaded Ukraine, invaded a foreign country, first time since the Second World War, redrawing the maps of Europe, And all of a sudden, we had to really do sanctions. And we really did sanctions. And the sanctions that we did impressed me. I was impressed with the freezing of the central bank reserves of Russia. I was impressed with the oligarch sanctions to go after most of the oligarchs. I was impressed with the sanctions on SWIFT, and I was impressed with the cutting off of Russian banks and the Russian government from the international capital markets. I was also impressed with the withdrawal of about 1,000 Western companies from Russia. But here we are, and this has been really overwhelming and impressive and damaging. But here we are, 2 years into it, and Putin's still going strong. I wouldn't say his economy is good, although he would say that. He wants to put on a brave face. He says, everything is fine, don't worry. In fact, his message to us is the sanctions aren't working, therefore, you know what, you might as well not have them. That's his message. The sanctions are working. They're causing all sorts of pain and strife for these people. But there are two elephants in the room. My colleague here just spoke about one of the elephants, which is the sanctions evasion. And the second elephant is oil. I was just reading an article a few minutes ago about the cost of the missiles, just today, the missiles that were fired on Ukraine. And they calculated that the missiles fired on Ukraine today cost $437 million, which is a lot of money. Well, it is a lot of money, but it's the same exact amount of money that Russia earns in oil exports today, just today. So just today, they earn enough money to pay for the $437 million of missiles. And the problem is that every day they earn $437 million. And as long as they can continue to sell oil, they can continue to earn $437 million a day, and they can continue to buy missiles and pay for their military and run a war economy. And so here we are in this terrible situation where we wanted to cut Russia off, sanction them, and stop them from doing this war, but we've missed one of the key things that allows them to do this war. And they will be able to continue to fight this war into perpetuity as long as they can continue to sell oil outside of their country. And so we have this unbelievably perverse situation where we, and I say we collectively because it's not just us, but the Indians and the Chinese and various other people, are sending all this money to Russia to buy weapons to kill Ukrainians. And then we, in this room, are then sending money to the Ukrainians to fight off the Russians. And we're also getting tired of sending the money to the Ukrainians to fight off the Russians. And so something's got to give. And what's giving right now is us sending the money to the Ukrainians to fight off the Russians. And they've just lost, I can't pronounce it, the Andika or Anvika, yes, over the weekend. The Russians have outgunned them 10 to 1 in terms of artillery. And presuming that we can actually get our act together and provide the Ukrainians with the necessary tools going forward in the short term, we're not going to be able to do it into perpetuity, and so we have to cut off the other side. So how do we cut off the other side? Well, we have a lot of tools at our disposal to cut off the other side. At the moment, in order to sell oil, you need to put it on a tanker. The tankers need insurance. We could pass legislation in our countries to sanction insurance companies if they insure ships that carry Russian oil. And what will happen the moment we pass that law in our respective countries? Insurance companies will no longer insure ships that carry Russian oil. And all of a sudden, there's not tankers available. I mean, there will be some, but not all. We can also sanction any ports in the world that allow ships to dock that move Russian oil. And then what happens then? All of a sudden, these ships don't have any place to dock. And then we can also sanction the refineries in the respective countries that refine the oil. And what will happen then? People won't buy the oil to refine it. And it seems to me that the big missing piece in this whole thing is these three areas. And I think if we did that, we would then cut off the second to last major lifeline, and we've heard about the other lifeline, and we might have some impact on this whole thing. Let me just finish up by saying one last thing. Alexei Navalny was killed on Friday last week. It's the most outrageous political assassination in many decades, and certainly in Russia. And there's one thing we can all do, and we should all be involved in this, which is that as I mentioned at the beginning of my little presentation, we've frozen $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. That money should now be confiscated. It should be confiscated from Russia. It should be used for the defense and reconstruction of Ukraine. The legislation to do that should be called the Navalny Act. And we should tell Putin that the cost of killing Navalny is $300 billion. Thank you.
Bill, thank you very much, and now we're very grateful, Mr. Eklund.
Thank you, and thank you for the nice words about Norway.
Here.
And Bill, for your nice words about the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. Okay. No, I'm good. So thank you for nice words about Norway and for nice words about the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. I must say that starting to cooperate with Bill Browder was a very important step for us. We had not thought enough about how corruption and money influence human rights. So it was a steep learning curve, and I think we have learned a lesson that if you analyze human rights violations in many corrupt authoritarian states, you should find out where the money flows and how those whistleblowers are targeted, who expose abuse of official positions, etc. Another point I want to make, it's a little bit personal. The Norwegian Helsinki Committee has arranged side events since 2019 in the OSCE Parliamentary Assemblies. And during the first years, we almost did it together with Vladimir Kara-Murza. And if he had not been in a terrible Russian prison, if he had been a free man, he would have been here with us, I'm 100% sure. So I also want to recognize him and the great effort he has done to try to influence developments in Russia. And we must all fight that he can again become a free man. Maybe you wonder why human rights organizations are so focused on sanctions. Because here we are not talking only about targeted sanctions against individuals or entities that commit human rights abuses or grand corruption. These sanctions are unprecedented. They both target individual sanctions, and more than 1,900 Russian citizens are sanctioned by the US and the EU and other countries in the sanction coalition. But there is also, as we heard, massive financial sanctions and sanctions on commodities. And there are also measures addressing misinformation. So a lot of Russian media outlets are not permitted to air their propaganda in the EU. And additionally, there are a lot of measures to deter sanction circumvention. Is this really a human rights issue? We came to the conclusion that it is, because these sanctions are at the bottom imposed to defend international law and human rights and humanitarian law. So we can, I think, say with 100% certainty that we are not outside our, let's say, area of responsibility as a human rights group. We have heard a mixed tale about how well the sanctions are working. But we are not here to spread misery and pessimism. I think what we want you to get from this side event is that sanctions are a very important tool. It can work, and it can work better than it does today. That's the main point. And I will add a few recommendations that I hope you can bring with you home and maybe act on. There are 38 countries in the sanction coalition, European and some Asian countries, and US and Canada and Australia and New Zealand. And in terms of economy, this is a very substantial part of world economy. And what we see is that since these broad sanctions are unprecedented, many countries were not prepared to enforce these sanctions. We can criticize that, but I think it's better to accept it and then work from there. And as we have heard, one of the most important things to do is to harmonize legislation in the sanctioning coalition in the countries. And we also see that border controls need more resources. We read reports that they are totally overburdened at some of the European borders, eastern borders, so they don't have the resources necessary to detect goods that should not pass that border. I will also add a few words about the Belarus gap. I think that is really the missing link in the European response to the Russian aggression, that they don't really see Belarus as part of that aggression, which it is. Russia could not have attacked Ukraine in the way it did without full cooperation from Minsk. So I think our recommendations will be that the same sanctions which are imposed against Russia should be imposed against Belarus. We are also working inside Norway. There was recently a news report that 9 companies in Norway had sold war-relevant goods to Turkey, and they ended up in Russia, and probably favored Russia in the war against Ukraine. So that is something we also have to think a lot about. And I think we have to challenge companies more than we do, because ultimately they produce the goods, and they should be responsible not only related to the supply chain to produce the goods, but also how their goods are being used. I'll also mention that we are active on the Norwegian Petroleum Fund, which is very big and owns shares in maybe almost all companies that in one way or another violate sanctions. And we want that management to be more active related to those companies and tell them to conduct more due diligence. My final point is that it's very pertinent to have this side event in the OSCE, because ultimately, to have sanctions to work, countries must work together. It's not enough that you have very good regulations in Brussels or in the US. Capitals must gear up and be very active in enacting missing legislation, addressing the problem of lack of negligence legislation. Because in some countries, you really have to prove that the company, well, the level of proof to challenge a company on legal grounds is so high that it doesn't happen often, as we heard. So negligence means that you cannot excuse yourself by saying, I didn't know. You really have to challenge the companies, but you should have known. And it's a lot of available information about if you sell something to a Turkish or Kazakhstan or other company, the risk that it will end up in Russia is very high. Last comment. Energy is crucial, as Bill have explained, but also food and fertilizers. I think Russia is profiting a lot from the situation, the high energy prices, and even the sanctions, and it grabs a bigger part of the world market for fertilizers and grain exporting. So we have to look into that aspect as well. Not the usual message from a human rights organization, but I wanted to add that. We see that as a challenge as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nicholas Slidell. Thank you so much. And hearing this, it really it concerns me so much. And I hope that looking ahead, that indeed input from everyone here, the thought of insurance on tankers, wow, that's real world. And I'd like to offer my office. I'm confident Congressman Lloyd Doggett, he's of another political party, and so we want to make it bipartisan, because it is. And any offering of suggestions on sanctions or whatever can be done in every way that's been mentioned here. I know our offices, and I'm going to volunteer Congresswoman Victoria Sparks. She would be, I know, very grateful to receive information, and Congressman Dr. Andy Harris. So the four of us, and then I regret that he's not here, but Ambassador Mike Carpenter is a great resource, and particularly he's the U.S. Ambassador to OSCE. He soon will be, he's been very close to President Biden. He's soon going to be actually returning to the White House. But he's, again, a person that I hope he will use every opportunity to provide what can be done, because we'd like to be prospective, not look back and say what's not been done correctly, but look what the loopholes are, look at the gaps, and then address that in any way that the United States can. But just in every way, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here today. And if there are any questions, and I'm actually going to refer to my colleague of another political party, Congressman Lloyd Doggett.
Well, thank you very much, and this was a great presentation by all of you. I believe there is a new report coming out today or tomorrow from a group called Global Witness, an NGO in the UK with whom Mr. Browder has worked in the past, that last year Putin earned 1.1 billion in euros in direct tax revenues just from the importation in Europe of refined products. Mr. Wilson and I have offered legislation in Congress on the loophole that allows Russia to ship in diesel fuel, gasoline, jet fuel, and the like, and completely circumvent our ban on oil and gas imports in that way. And we're hopeful that we'll see action in the United States. We, of course, have a much smaller amount of importation than many European countries, and everyone's concerned about the impact on the price at the gas pump. But I think this is a loophole that we need to try to close. And clearly, the $60 a barrel cap that is in place now has been insufficient to deal with the broader problem of circumventing the sanctions in that way. And then I would just add that Mr. Wilson and I have also filed legislation that's been approved by the House Foreign Affairs Committee concerning this matter of Russian assets, sovereign assets. Our colleague Mike McCall, who's a Republican who chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is the sponsor of something called the Repo Act, which could easily be renamed the Navalny Act, as you suggest, and it does provide for using the sovereign assets of the Russians for Ukrainian reconstruction and other purposes, and I think we need to act on both and continue to urge our countries to work together to close the loopholes that are oiling the Russian war machine and to take the assets of these war criminals and put them to good use in Ukraine. Thank you much, Joe.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Anyone, any other questions? And hey, I should have read the whole article. Guess who the article is about? Bill Browder on the front page of the New York Times today, okay? So we're finally with a dignitary. So yes.
Hello everyone, I'm Mr. I'm representative of Bulgaria, and I just wanted to make a note. It's not a question. It is imposing sanctions on Russia works, but it also works towards the political parties who are governing in their countries, as Russia very successfully pays for propaganda and saying, okay, you can never go without us, which turns out not to be true in the end. But I would suggest that we see that this war continues more than we anticipated, and it will be very helpful if we can create not only restrictive measures towards the common enemy, let's say, but also to support each other in like making the trade between our countries easier, so we can provide alternatives to raw materials and goods that were in the past coming from Russia and are making a huge influence in our economies as a matter of making the basic goods more expensive. So while we're taking measures to restrict Russians' trade to Russia, we should be thinking how to make the trade between our countries easier in order to be able to sustain and endure this battle if it's prolonged more.
Would anybody like to comment? Because that is a real issue.
I think you're perfectly right, and for Bulgaria, as you know, the only country in the EU who has been given permission to import oil, for example. First of all, there is oil in the world. Oil is floating. There are many holes in the oil sanctions. There is ship-to-ship loading in high seas. But also Russian actually exporting oil to Saudi Arabia and Emirates, whereas that oil then is other oils are re-exported to. But at the end of the day, as you said, we were told that we cannot do without this Russian good and this Russian goods and gas and energy and all of it. But actually, when it shows up, we can actually do without it. Gunnar mentioned fertilizer. When Vietnam buys fertilizer from Russia, they pay in rubles. But when Europe buys fertilizer from Russia, they pay exclusively in euros and dollars. So one thing is, that's a political issue, not for me as an expert to tell you kind of what to do politically when reforms and plugging holes we can recommend. But when Europe actually buys things from Russia, we do it in the worst possible way. We do it with our country.
Thank you very much. And under the category of small world, I'm looking forward tomorrow to hosting the ambassador from Bulgaria to the United States at a dinner with President Donald Trump. And then on Saturday, he will be an election observer in the presidential primary in South Carolina. So look for the ambassador on television. Yes.
Peter Beam, I'm Senator Chair of Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee in the Senate. We've passed legislation to repurpose seized assets. We haven't moved forward yet because we're alone. And my question for Mr. Bjorkman, I think, is that you mentioned in your remarks that you had briefed G7. G7 is under the Italian presidency right now. Do you get a sense that there is movement going forward on the repurposing of seized Russian assets? And do you think that the murder of Alexei Navalny is going to give that some more impetus?
I think maybe my colleague Browder will be better situated to comment, because I'm an expert in trade, and we are economists, and we are doing quite a lot on data and analysis. But I mean, these funds are basically in Belgium, right? And some of them in the United States as well. And this is up to the EU. I mean, the whole kind of issue here in the progress in the dynamics is in the EU, right? It's with countries like Belgium, France, Germany, etc. But I think others are more versed in that dynamics than I am.
I can say a couple things about that. So this was sort of an obvious thing to me right after the war started, that the frozen central bank reserve should be used for the defense and reconstruction of Ukraine. And when I first started talking about it, and I started traveling the world talking about it, I was met with a brick wall in most places. The idea that we would confiscate that money just seemed completely inappropriate from most governments. But no, I think most people sort of thought the war would be over quickly, and as the war has dragged on, and as the financial strains have become more and more apparent, the chemistry and the optics of that decision have changed. And I can say in Britain, where I live, it's a complete 180-degree turn. I can remember previous foreign secretaries saying absolutely not. And the new foreign secretary, Lord Cameron, is now at every international conference saying that it's the right thing to do morally, politically, and financially. I can also say that the US has changed its position. I think Jake Sullivan was against it for the first year and a half of the war, and now apparently the US administration is supporting it and coming back to the Repo Act, which I like your idea of renaming it the Navalny Act, and I hope that's something we can feed into the system. It passed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and hopefully it will go for a full vote in the Senate, which it will pass for sure. The bottleneck is the EU, and specifically Belgium. Of the 300 billion, 220 billion is located in Belgium at Euroclear. I don't want to insult any Belgians here, but it's hard to imagine Belgians sort of stepping out into the firing line by themselves, and so it has to be an EU decision. And EU decision making is very hard to anticipate. And at the moment, the EU has decided it's okay to take the interest on the money, but not the principal, which is kind of absurd, but that is their position at the moment. It's absurd because the moment you take the interest, you might as well take the principal. It doesn't change anything from a legal standpoint. But my prediction is that the money will be ultimately confiscated because the economic realities will overtake any caution, bureaucratic caution.
Thank you. Yes.
I think the use of the frozen assets for rebuilding and defending Ukraine is one of the key issues. Another one is to ensure that Putin and his entourage is prosecuted for the crime of aggression. When it comes to the first, one of the more optimistic articles I've read about it was that there is a Belgian proposal to use the frozen assets as a guarantee for providing loans to Ukraine, and that could bypass some of the legal hurdles. So then Russia could decide whether to pay compensation themselves or the assets will be used for it. That could be a way out. When it comes to the crime of aggression, all major Western countries and even international institutions have said that they want Putin and his government to be investigated and tried for the crime of aggression. But we don't hear much about progress in how that can be done. So that is also my challenge to you, to to investigate how this can be done in your capitals. There are some legal problems, but as we say, at least in northern Norway, where I come from, if there is a will, we will find a way to do things.
Thank you very much, Gunnar. It's fascinating as we discuss that you bring up the hundreds of billions of held that in the tradition of Lend-Lease to use as a loan guarantee. I think I know a candidate for president who might find that interesting.
Thank you. I'm a journalist living in Excel. I'm originally from Azerbaijan. My question regarding future of Russian civil society. You're speaking about using these frozen assets for recovering Ukraine, which is absolutely fair. But without Russian civil society, which is significant numbers of Russian civil society actors right now living and operating from exile, without them we'd never have a chance to change Russia. And it's like, why do you think it's fair to also use these frozen assets, like which is central bank reserves, and other frozen stolen assets, which is frozen by Western countries, for support Russian civil society, and especially anti-corruption groups like Alexei Navalny and other groups expose this corruption, expose crime of the Putin regime. Because what is I see as like a journalist and also political for himself, Russian civil society, Belarusian civil society in exile, even in Azerbaijan, we have a significant, serious lack of the funding. We're not able to operate without funds. And I think it's fair to use this part of the asset to support exile-based Russian civil society communities. What is your vision on this?
I think it's a great idea. What do you think?
Well, I really want to stick with addressing, if it gets any more confusing to the American public, I believe I'm in an environment where we want to look at what's going on now and not look back and see what we can do, but keep the focus indeed on the murderous invasion and the efforts. And then, to me, when the people of Ukraine are successful, then there'll be other focus. But we need to focus on one issue at a time.